I'm Matt Neland. I'm the program director of EMTS Academy, and I've been a paramedic for almost 30 years, which went by amazingly fast. And I've been in EMS education for 22 of those. During this time, I've trained somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 EMS providers. I've seen a lot of changes in EMS, but the one I'm most excited about is what I'm going to share with you today. You see, what's been missing in all of the framework that we teach our students is this decision-making framework. So I was very excited when I read Hasard Lee's book, The Art of Clear Thinking. To me, it felt like I found the missing piece of the puzzle. So I'd like to introduce you to my friend, Justin Hasard Lee. And Hasard is a fighter pilot in both the F-16 and the F-35, but his most important contribution has been as the architect of elite performance. He figured out why some teams thrive under pressure and why others crumble. Hasard then put those lessons into a battle-tested framework that instills a culture of decentralized command and absolute ownership. That framework became the only outcome operating system and the foundation of his #2 best-selling Wall Street Journal book, The Art of Clear Thinking. That is a lot of books sold. And today he's going to share why it's crucial. This is crucial for a high-performing team. Hasard, welcome to EMS, and I'm going to give the mic to you.
Well, Matt, thank you for having me. This is really a pleasure to be here. Uh, so imagine for a moment that you're in the cockpit of an F-16. You're weaving through the mountains of Afghanistan on a moonless night, and looking outside, you see these mountains. They rise like these black daggers, 20,000 feet in the air. But inside, you're calm, you're focused. And that's exactly where I was coming back from a mission in the Helmand province with my wingman. It was quiet in the cockpit. You could hear the rhythmic sound, the hiss from the oxygen mask. The air from it smelled like rubberized, like opening up a new box of sneakers. And as we prepared to land, the runway came into view, and it was this island of lights in this sea of blackness. And all of a sudden, I saw what looked like an orange rope start climbing into the sky. And I blinked, half expecting it to go away. And then I saw a second one and a third one. And all of a sudden, the radio burst to life saying, "The base is under attack. Abort the landing." I felt the surge of adrenaline through my body. I slammed the throttle forward. 30-foot flame shot out the back of my jet as I climbed back into the air. And as soon as we got to a safe altitude, the attack was over. And now I had a flashing fuel warning light in the middle of my heads-up display. And that was letting me know that I had 20 minutes of fuel left. And that's when we heard words that every combat aviator dreads hearing. And that was, the runway has been struck and it's out of service. And so our mission had now changed to survival. The primary runway was shut down. The secondary runway was closed. The nearest base was closed as well. And you just feel this tension and this pit in your stomach forming. But fortunately, I had been taught a decision-making framework to be able to go through that in a logical sequence of events, to be able to remain calm under pressure. And this is not something I was born with. This was something that was taught to me by the Air Force. And it turned out there's another airborne tanker, an airborne tanker. These are giant flying gas stations, but it was nearly 100 miles away on a different mission. And I keyed the mic and it said, "Mojo," this is Viper, Mojo was their call sign. "We're emergency fuel. We need immediate assistance." And the voice that came back was this calm, clear voice. "Viper, this is Mojo. We're on our way. Tell us where to go." And my wingman and I slowly started turning towards that last known position of the tanker, going away from those lights back towards the mountains. And we were trying to find the tanker on our radar, but we couldn't find it because these mountains, they were so tall. And we're desperately looking through our night vision goggles. Everything's just shades of green and black. And we can't find it. And I'm just looking down at these mountain peaks that look like razor blades down there. And I was starting to think that this isn't going to be our night. And looking out, I all of a sudden saw one of the stars that looked like it flickered. And I leaned in and it flickered again. And I realized it wasn't a star. It was the tanker's strobe light. It was infrared, so naked to the invisible eye, but through our night vision goggles, it was this beacon that was guiding us to the tanker. And We followed it. My wingman refueled first. I pulled into position. This giant mothership above us, the boom came out and made a thud as it connected to our jet. And then I was able to feel the fuel transferring over into my empty tanks. And it was the feeling of life itself. Now, for the crew of that tanker, we weren't their responsibility that night. We weren't their task, but they saw a team in trouble and they came to our rescue. And it's something that I've seen time and time again throughout my career. It's probably just like an EMS. It's your personal standards what gets you into that seat, but it's the team that decides to own the outcome with you. That's what gets you home. That's what gets your patient home. And when Matt came to me, I was so thrilled to be able to talk to EMS personnel. I got my start getting a taste of it back when I was in high school. I was a ski patroller, and I did the outdoor emergency got the outdoor emergency training certification. And there are so many parallels from at least that training to what I do now as a fighter pilot, or what I did. I recently separated, but we're both making life and death decisions. Time is of the essence, and people's survival really depend on the decisions that we're making. So there's so many parallels, and especially as I've gotten to know Matt, it's really been eye-opening to see. So with that, Matt, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Hazard, for that story. That's a great example of the kind of stress that you have as a fighter pilot. So, how does this relate to EMS? Well, it's really the same. It could be VFib on the floor of a kitchen in a crowded restaurant. It could be an airway that you can't secure, or it could even be a critical trauma call with too many patients. The physics are the same. High risk, limited information, and lives on the line. Good teams focus on tasks, and great teams focus on the outcome. So, Hazard, with that, why don't you take us through the five laws?
So as Matt was saying, I was a fighter pilot, but really my most important role was as an architect for performance. I was the chief of training systems for the largest fighter training base that the Air Force has. And really my job was to deconstruct the performance of these teams and figure out what made great teams and what made poor teams. What I realized and found out through our research was that a great team is not just a better version of a good team. They fundamentally think different. And just as Matt said, uh, good teams, they focus on the tasks at hand, but great teams, they own the outcome. They own that mission and everything tied to it, even if it goes beyond their individual tasks. And so what I've found is that there are five laws that really build this culture of ownership, this mission first ownership of how to achieve the objective no matter what. And those five laws are one team, one fight, decentralized execution, no decision is a decision, adapt and overcome, and steel sharpens steel. And each one of these will give your organization a measurable gain, but together they're an integrated system. It's almost like a big, heavy flywheel. It takes a lot of effort to get it up to speed. Each one of these laws is a disciplined push to get it there. But once it's up to speed, you have a self-sustaining force that's able to take the initiative to adapt and overcome and to be able to achieve the mission. I'll briefly go over some of the laws and then dive into one that's focused on decision making. So the first law really sets the foundation for everything, and that's one team, one fight. This is mission over ego. This is what the tanker crew showed in the skies over Afghanistan. It wasn't about their task. It wasn't about our task. They saw a team in trouble and they came to our rescue. And one of the biggest misconceptions about fighter pilots is, from movies like Top Gun, that it's just Maverick and Goose going in saving the world. And in reality, it couldn't be any further away from the truth, because usually we're going in with 100 other aircraft, and it's not just aircraft. We have people on the ground, we have ships, we even have satellite operators, and so it's this big cohesive team that has to come together. And if you have a big ego and it's all about you, you really turn off those other teams. And I'm sure it's the same in the EMS community. When you show up on site, you're dealing with a lot of other organizations, fire personnel, police, you're working with the hospitals, dispatch. So you're bringing this whole team together, and everybody is trying to achieve the same thing. So that's why it's so important to subvert the ego, to put the mission first. And what I found is that there are two principles that can really, really help with this. And one is it's relationships over rank. Being in the military, a lot of people will often come to me and say, it must have been easy for you in the military as a leader because you could just order people to do things. But in reality, whether you're in the military, whether you're in EMS, whether you're in business, when you're ordering people to do things, you're only going to create a culture of compliance. People are only going to do just enough to get you off their back. It really comes down to building those relationships, building those relationships ahead of time. It's an investment. Building those relationships with the tanker crew, building relationships with the troops on the ground, and EMS, building relationships with all those other organizations so that when you show up for a mission together, you're already starting here, not down at the bottom. The second is advocates over experts. Show me a fighter pilot that is phenomenal at flying, but a poor advocate, and I'll show you a mediocre fighter pilot. We put a lot of resources into training these pilots. It costs about $60 million for a fully experienced fighter pilot. And yet we'll send our best and brightest to the Pentagon to fly a desk. And they all hate it, but they're willing to do it and volunteer for it because they know they're being advocates for the enterprise. It's not necessarily the sexiest thing to go and to do something that's not your primary duty, but you're really building those relationships again that will pay off later down the road. And in fact, we would send fighter pilots to go and sit next to those tanker crews just so that if a situation like this happened, we had those relationships built. So Matt, I'll let you take over here.
I think one of the other things that we see in EMS is this joint teamwork thing as well, because when you're the lead paramedic, you're basically the orchestra conductor, and you have EMTs who are getting vital signs. You may need somebody to get the stretcher, to splint or bandage, and we do the same thing, this coordinated team, and it really is the mission over us. We're all there because of the patient, and if you ever forget that, you probably need to step out of EMS and realize it's you've made it about you or something else. We're all there for the patient. So that's the end of Law 1. Let's transition to Law 2.
So Law 2 is decentralized execution. This is really a force multiplier. I really got exposed to this as a fighter pilot. I was in a dust choke valley in Afghanistan, and on my wing was one of the newest pilots in the squadron. And our mission was to protect a group of U.S. Army Rangers on the ground. And our commander's intent was to bring everybody home alive. Now, midway through that mission, a second group of U.S. soldiers came under attack. It was just me and my wingman there, and our doctrine says that we always stay together. And so now I was faced with a dilemma. Do I split the force apart in support of the commander's intent, or do I keep us together in accordance with our doctrine? And the decision really came down to one thing. Did I trust my wingman? And that day I bet on my wingman. I said, Viper 2, you're clear to support. With that, he peeled away. And for the next hour, I heard that new wingman, the newest guy in the squadron, really turn into a leader. His voice could have been shaky, but it was calm and it was clear. It was providing the support that those troops on the ground desperately needed. And then result was the mission was a success, but more importantly, everybody made it home alive. And they made it home alive because that wingman didn't just have a task to follow, he had a mission to own. And what I found is that there are two important things to execute decentralized execution. It is clarity and cover. Clarity is, think of it as you're giving your team the compass, not the map. You're giving them the why so that they can figure out the how. And second is cover. It's the non-negotiable contract that if they make a bad decision and they're doing their best, that you will have their back. Because when you do that, they're able to take the initiative. And so we have some different frameworks that we'll send out on how to give a great commander's intent so that it's absolutely crystal clear for your team. And that's really how you stop giving your team tasks to follow instead of that missions to own.
I think sometimes when I first heard decentralized command, it was a little bit confusing for me, but I realized we do this all the time, right? If we're in the city of Austin, we have one medical director who is giving marching orders to every EMS ambulance out there. If you see this, if you have somebody with chest pain, go ahead and give them some aspirin and some nitroglycerin. And so we are really experts at this, but you do have one person who's calling the shots. And again, in EMS, that's a medical director. So this is really great.
Yeah, so law three, and we'll dive into this a little bit more, is that no decision is a decision. And I'm sure as EMS personnel, you are intimately familiar with this. There are a lot of organizations where a delay is, can cost the company value, but it's like 6 months down the road. But as fighter pilots, as EMS personnel, every second matters. And no decision is absolutely a decision to pause the momentum. And if someone can't breathe for just a few minutes, they're gonna die. And the framework that we use as fighter pilots is ACE. And it's simple, but it's really simple so that you can use it in the heat of the moment. We have a saying that as new pilots, as soon as they put on their helmets, they lose 20 IQ points. And I'm sure many of you have seen this with, the new guy or girl out on the scene. They might have been really good academically, but it's a whole different ballgame when you're in the mix of one of these difficult life and death situations. And so anyway, the ACE framework, it's simple, but it's simple so that it's something that's repeatable, so that somebody new can execute it. And so ACE stands for assess, choose, execute. So the first step is to assess the problem. You're trying to build the mental model of what's going on in front of you. As pilots, this is what we call our cross check. We have all these different gauges and dials, including how the jet is feeling. Other aircraft are sending information to us. And so it's our job to stop, to build this picture. And we actually have a trick that seems pretty crazy at first, but the reason it works is actually profound. And I experienced this in the skies over Arizona. I was flying in an F-16, and I was fighting another adversary this was in training, another F-16. We're going up over the top, and my jet had a malfunction, and it started tumbling out of control. And in that moment, all you're doing is you're seeing blue sky and brown earth. You have two voices in that moment. The first is, we're gonna die, do something. The second, though, is the calm, clear voice of your training. And it says, don't just do anything, do the right thing, and start by winding the clock. And what this means is these aircraft, they're the latest technology, but in the F-16, it has a hand wound clock just in the lower right corner by your knee. And it's just in case all the electricity fails in the jet. And the saying, and what we teach new pilots is, if you're in a difficult situation, reach down and wind the clock. And it seems crazy to take your hand off the controls and do it, but the reason is profound. It's to act as a physical circuit breaker for your mind so you don't listen to that first voice. It gives you a beat to take a breath, to assess the situation, to not jump to some conclusion, because when you do that, most of the time you're running off in a direction that is going to cause the rest of the team more effort and time. And that allows you to go to the next step. Now, Matt, I know you had something that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I love that. When you told me this story, I was just amazed. I'm imagining this plane going like this and you falling and saying, I'm going to die. And then you're like, yeah, that's all right. And just reaching over and winding this clock. I'm like, poof. And that sat with me for a long time. Even as you and I were talking about it, it was still there 15 or 20 minutes later. And I've told my family and friends about it. But I wonder in EMS what we could do similarly. We have gloves, and in Texas it's really hot, just like it is in your area in Arizona. But so putting your gloves on probably isn't that pause, but maybe we could put our stethoscope on, or put our stethoscope in the pocket. And my question to you, the audience, is what can you do to wind the clock? And maybe you put that in chat while we keep going.
Yeah, that's great idea. But yeah, it's obviously not important to just wind that clock. It's just the physical act of separating what you're doing from that first voice. So that's step one, being able to assess the problem in front of you. Next is choosing the correct course of action. And so we're faced with multiple different choices. How do you choose the best one versus the second best one? And for us, it comes down to expected value. And we do sometimes for these long-term missions put some math behind it, but I want to make it, something that you can use in the moment. And what we do is it's essentially just what is the risk to reward. So we rank order all of the steps on the risk to reward. Sometimes, obviously, when you're tumbling out of the sky, it has to be more intuition based on your experience. But I would say that is extremely rare. They're usually a few seconds, even 3 or 4 seconds, that you can physically rank order. What are the top three options that you can do? And in fact, that's what I did when I was tumbling out of the sky. I was able to assess the problem. There were 2 or 3 things that were going wrong. I was able to rank order them, prioritize them, and then start going through the discipline checklist to solve it. So the first was a memorized checklist. And then as I started to get the aircraft under control, it was transitioning to a kneeboard checklist that we have to make sure that I hadn't missed any steps. And lastly is to be able to execute. So prioritizing what are those different steps, being able to implement the plan, being able to overcome the obstacles, because things will always go wrong. Things will always go not according to plan. And I'm sure as EMS personnel, you're very familiar with this. Every scene is different. There are always going to be different challenges. You're never going to see the same thing twice. Same thing as fighter pilots. We're in this dynamic environment of the real world. And so being able to overcome those obstacles, deal with the stress of combat, or being on the scene, and ultimately being able to execute to achieve your objective despite what's going on.
You bring up a really good point about obstacles. It's something that we do for all of our paramedic scenarios, whether it's a monitor failure, radio failure, your partner gets defibrillated, your partner has a hypoglycemic event and passes out, we give them some sort of obstacle to overcome. So I want to kind of walk through what Hasard's saying is amazing, this ACE framework. So I want to give it to you in an EMS setting. I want you to imagine that you are on a call, you got dispatched to a 23-year-old male patient who was drinking alcohol. He walked into traffic and was struck by a car. The car was going about 20 to 30 miles an hour. Traffic has been shut down by law enforcement, so we're looking at scene safety, and that one's already been addressed. The fire department is on scene, and they're holding C-spine. The patient is found lying in the street, supine with blood and vomit in his mouth. As you approach, you hear snoring respirations. You're the lead medic, whether that's paramedic or maybe if you're the lead EMT. So we're going to assess. We're going to do a rapid trauma exam. When you do that, you found blood and vomit in the mouth, and you see snoring and slow respirations. He's got bilateral lower leg fractures with moderate bleeding, and he's got a left closed wrist fracture. You also have a distraught friend who witnessed the accident and is crying uncontrollably. So these are the multiple things that we're going to have to deal with. And so how do we make sense of them? Well, we need to figure out what our primary concern is. They're all important, but what's number one? There's several issues. The primary concern is the possibility of an airway obstruction on an unconscious patient. So what are the priorities? We're going to fix the airway issue. We're going to assist with breathing. We're going to control major bleeding. We're going to rapidly extricate the patient from the scene, and then we're going to head to a trauma center. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to determine the desired effect for the airway issue. We're going to take one problem at a time. So again, the first one here is fix the airway issue. And that goes kind of in the center of this hub and spoke or mind map. So we need a patent airway. We're going to list all the options we have to control this airway. And those could be suction. It could be a Heimlich, although I think in this patient, we probably don't need to do the Heimlich. It's not a choking thing. We could use McGill's forceps to clear the airway manually. Those are little pliers that we use as paramedics to actually reach down and remove that piece of steak from their throat. It could be an OPA. It could be an NPA, or if needed, a paramedic could do a surgical airway. So again, this is our mind map. Here's all of our options. We don't need to do all of these, so we can start eliminating those. So we can eliminate the Heimlich. We don't need the McGill's. And at this point, we don't need a surgical airway. So this leaves us with 3 options: suction, an OPA, and an NPA. We're going to make a decision and implement. And this is where once you have the list of what you're going to do, we need to prioritize this. And Hazard mentioned checklists in the military and in flying. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We do the same thing in EMS. So we're going to start by doing suctioning, then we're going to do an OPA, and then we're going to use an NPA bilaterally. So here it is in text format. We're going to suction, OPA, bilateral NPAs. Remember, we have 2 nostrils, so give them both an NPA, again, assuming that there's no fractures there. Our patient now has a patent airway, and we're going to move on to the next step, breathing, and we would repeat the same process. So Hazard, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the emotional impacts of high stress situations.
Yeah, so that would be the 4th law. So adapt and overcome. Every plan has an expiration date, and that's the date that it meets contact with reality. And as I was saying, this is something that I'm sure EMS personnel share with fighter pilots. You're in this chaotic real world environment, and things are always going to go wrong. No fighter pilot has ever flown a perfect mission. Now, emotion can be a really great thing. Emotion allows you to empathize with other teammates. It's foundational for being able to build those relationships, for having the passion to achieve the mission. But the problem is that when you get too much emotion, that you can start to choke. And choking is where you fail to do something that you know how to do. And as a fighter pilot instructor, I would see this all the time. There'd be some phenomenal students who were young, who knew the textbook example of how to do everything right. They had shown that they had done it right, but they would make a small mistake and they would let it compound. And at the speeds we're flying, about a mile every 3 seconds of closure, it could very quickly get into a dangerous situation. And the reason why they were choking is because they'd make a small mistake and they would start thinking about that mistake, rehashing the mistake in their mind, or thinking about the implications of it. What were their peers going to say? What were the instructors going to say? Were they going to be washed out of the course? And very quickly, since they made a mistake, they actually needed to perform even better now. And now they're using some of their cognitive bandwidth to focus on other things. And this is where that saying, the losing 20 IQ points as soon as you put on your helmet, really comes into play. And so the question is, in those high pressure moments, how do you calm yourself down? And again, we have a pretty simple checklist that we memorize and do. The real key, though, from what I've seen working with new pilots, is can you do this when you're feeling that weight of emotion? It's one thing in the classroom to say, oh, this is easy. It's another thing when you're freaking out to be able to bring yourself off the edge and really calm your body down so that you can think clearly. And for us, it's a 3-part checklist. It's move, breathe, talk. It's simple. The first is to move, just doing a posture reset. We have a lot of instruments, like I was saying, and a lot of people will start focusing on one instrument and they'll lose situational awareness of everything going on. And often a clue as an instructor is that these students, they'll stop being able to communicate effectively with me. They'll start missing radio calls, and I can tell they're starting to get what we call sucked into the soda straw. So just doing a posture reset, getting your shoulders back, your head up, looking around, not getting tunnel vision, that's the first step. The second is to breathe. It's, again, simple technique, box breathing, 5 seconds in, hold 5 seconds, 5 seconds out, hold 5 seconds. That activates the parasympathetic nervous system, calms the body down. In fact, we have a lot of students that do this, and it really helps when they go to the tanker, that big airborne mothership, because usually they're pretty freaked out. Even though they're sitting in a seat, we put heart rate monitors on them, and it's about 170 beats a minute. Even though they're sitting in a seat, not even moving there, not even turning. And your fine motor skills really degrade when your heart rate's that high. So using these techniques of just being able to breathe, calm down. And lastly is to talk. We always fly with a wingman, at least one, sometimes many more. Being able to talk. So as you're starting to get tunnel vision, probably your other teammates are experiencing that as well, but they have a slightly different vantage point. And when you're able to talk, you're able to get all those different views together, and that's what builds situational awareness of the scene in front of you. Now, as leaders, we have one additional responsibility, and this is to shrink the change. Change is scary for most people, and everybody can handle a different amount of change. So being able to assess your teammate, how much stress are they experiencing? This is when those relationships come into view, and being able to meet them where they're at. And I know this from my brief experience in 2000 and 2003, going through the outdoor EMT training. When you have a parent who is freaking out with their kid being hurt, we would give them a small kind of menial task to do so that they could focus on shrinking the change, because the key is giving something actionable that the team can do, that each member of the team can do. That's how you create action, and action is the antidote to fear.
Yeah, Hazard, I want to back up just for a second and share a breathing example that demonstrates this so well. When I was at Austin EMS, they had what was called a challenging outdoor personal experience. So it's called a COPE class. It's like a high ropes class. And so they had what was called the pamper pole. And the pamper part was that when you got to the top of the pole, you would poop yourself. That was kind of the running joke. And so I climbed to the top of this telephone pole, and at the very top of it is a little yellow smiley face. And I was able to climb up on top, and it's only like 12 inches across. And I stood up there, and the whole pole is going whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm like, this is crazy. And somebody on the ground yelled to me to breathe. And so I was like, well, okay, let's try it. So I took a couple breaths. It was only 2 or 3 breaths. And immediately my knees stopped shaking so much that I could stand on that pamper pole. I could look around and I could get to the next step. And I think it's so underrated that we really need to teach our students that before you start an IV, before you do any procedure, maybe even intubate, take a nice, slow, deep breath. And I saw in some of the comments when we were talking about wind the clock, somebody said, take a deep breath. And I thought that was really good. On to Law 4 with Adapt and Overcome, some of the EMS examples, your monitor quits on you, or you can't intubate, you can't dispatch over your radio, you miss that IV. And like you were saying, sometimes it's that domino effect, and we need to get in there and just stop that and say, okay, I missed the IV. Let's hit the next one. Take a breath and keep going.
The fifth and final law is steel sharpens steel. This means growth happens at the edge of discomfort. Now, as a fighter pilot, the longest walk isn't out to your jet. It's to the debrief after a failed mission. I remember I was the mission commander at Red Flag, one of the largest training exercises in the world, and I was leading a team of 100 other aircraft to rescue a downed pilot. And right from the start, the mission had issues. We couldn't find exactly where that downed pilot was. We're all airborne, and the fuel is rapidly decreasing. And we get to the point where we have to go or we have to abort. And the decision was mine to make. And I made the decision to go. And it was the wrong decision. We pushed out my most capable fighters. They started running low on fuel. They had to go home. And that's when the enemy struck, and they were able to shoot down the rescue helicopter. And the mission was a complete failure. Walking into the debrief facility, it's 3 a.m. in the morning. You're going from night into this, it looks like a hospital, no windows in there, just bright white lights. You just hear the hum of the projectors, and you can just feel the weight of failure. Everything's displayed up from the mission on the walls. And my job was to lead the team through all the mistakes that I had made so that we could get better together. Midway through the debrief, one of my deputies got up and he said, no, that part was on me. I should have communicated my fuel state better. And as we went along, each one of my deputies did the same thing. And that's because ownership is contagious. Here's this moment that was painful for all of us, this failure that we had. It didn't cause us to crumble. It brought us closer together. That day we went from a team of experts, of individual experts, to one that would collectively work together to swarm the mission and own the outcome. Now, the misconception that a lot of leaders and organizations have is they have to create a nice culture, one that values comfort above all else. But that's mistaking being nice for being respectful. Being nice is about avoiding discomfort. Being respectful is about meeting people at the edge of their discomfort and supporting them along the way. That discomfort, that's where the growth happens. Now, it's not a brutal culture. It's an environment where you're pushing people, but you have their back. When they make a mistake, because they inevitably will at the edge of their discomfort, you're not going to jump down their throat. You're going to be able to support them. And that's what allows them to continue taking the initiative, to continue learning. The question is, what's the best way to inject this culture into your team and organization? Now, for us, what we found is it's the debrief. Now, the debrief doesn't have to be this complex 8-hour process. In fact, you can do it in as short as 5 minutes through what I call the 3x3 debrief. Couple rules of engagement. First is it has to be hard scheduled, or you have to have some sort of rhythm where it's always done. If you don't do that, it's the first thing that gets blown off and it doesn't happen. Number two, it's about process, not people. When you focus on people, their ego gets involved and you're not able to make progress. But when you focus on process, processes can be changed. And the key is getting down to what was the root cause that caused something to fail. And then lastly is the leader must go first. When the leader goes first, they set the psychological safety for the team to admit their mistakes. Most organizations don't have this kind of culture where people are willing to admit their mistakes. But if you think about it, that's the most selfless thing that somebody can do, to sacrifice just a bit of their ego, calling out a mistake that they made that maybe nobody would have known about. But you're doing that for the whole organization so that they can get better. All right, the 3x3 is simple. So it's first, what are 3 things that went well? Confidence is crucial for a high-performing team. Next is, what is 3 things that didn't go well? And again, you're trying to dig down here, trying to develop what is that core process. And then lastly, what are 3 things we're going to change for next time? Because that is what turns a conversation into action. And it's really about just getting a little bit better each time. And this works with not only your team, it works for one-on-ones, it works individually. If at the end of every day or the end of every call, you do a quick 3x3 debrief, you won't imagine the amount of progress that you make when you look back at yourself from 6 months ago.
In EMS, we do this, especially with our paramedic students. After they run every scenario, they debrief. How could somebody do this on an ambulance? I can see it if it's a big call, like a pin in with extrication or a rescue or something like that. But how do you do this every day? And do you do this in your personal life?
So I personally think that, this is something that you can do all the time. That getting that feedback back into the system, that's the critical piece to a culture of continuous improvement. So if you look, any fighter pilot, every single one of them, flies with a little notebook. And that's probably because we are oftentimes in classified facilities and can't have a phone. But the notebook, and I have a whole bunch right here from my previous years flying, we do the 3x3 after every flight or after every brief, and you're filling it with this feedback. And that's how you're able to get better. And so this is what I found is what over time really allows a team to really thrive, to get great together, and individuals as well, being able to do a debrief and to really separate their ego from it. Because everybody has, especially a high performing team, has pride in what they do, but being able to see it as a selfless act and being able to not get emotional about it, to realize that this is just about being able to get better. So it starts with a cultural aspect to it. Does your culture allow this? But even if it doesn't, individually, I think flipping that mindset of this is how you get better. And I'm not going to tie my ego to the debrief, because we're trying to find things that went wrong and we're trying to get better from it. And ultimately, it's about becoming a high performing team and saving lives. As a fighter pilot, just like EMS personnel, the technology around us is getting more and more advanced. And what that does is it allows us to be far more capable than we could in the past. Just a few of these F-35s is equal to squadrons of planes from the Vietnam era days. And what that means is that each decision that you're making is being leveraged more and more. So instead of 16 aircraft like a Vietnam era day, we have 4 aircraft flying out. So each one of those pilots needs to be at their best because that technology is amplifying everything they do. So that's why the training is so crucial to be able to get them to their absolute peak because lives are on the line. We're trying to save the lives of those US soldiers on the ground, like I talked about. And I'm sure it's the same in EMS as an EMS personnel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the application here is that you don't need to do a full debrief, a full 3 by 3 after every call. But how about one thing that could have gone better? Hey, I needed you to set me up for an IV, or we need to set up the IV equipment so that it's in one of those little bundles. I mean, you've got your Venogard or Tegaderm, you've got your needle, your alcohol, a little gauze, and the tourniquet wrapped around it. So let's make sure that we can be a little bit faster, more like an F1 pit crew, right? I've also heard of people doing this personally. At the end of every day, I go through what I call my wins journal or my victory log of things that went well for me. But I think also adding this as a habit at the end of the day and saying what didn't go well, where am I going to do better? Maybe I need to show some appreciation for an employee or a student or an instructor, something like that. Or maybe you could say, I'm going to give 5 patients high fives on the next shift. So I think that's really applicable. Hazard, you have an interesting story about some Rangers pinned down. Do you want to share that one?
Yeah, it's actually my final combat mission. We were in Afghanistan getting ready to fly home. And so basically we're taking off all the weapons, putting on travel pods so that we can make the long flight back to the US because you take your jets into the country, you take them out. And my task that day was simple. It was to give an orientation ride to a new squadron that had just shown up. And we're in the middle of the briefing, and there's this dust that coats everything in Afghanistan. And so there's a dust storm earlier in that day. You could smell the dirt in the air. Midway through that brief, our operations supervisor bursts in. He's out of breath. He says, "There's a group of Army Rangers under attack. We need you to launch now." So we jump up from our chairs, run to our lockers, put on all our gear, run out to the jets, start taxi, take off, afterburner, pushing us as fast as we can towards where the firefight's happening. Mid overhead, it's chaos. I can hear on the radio cracks of gunfire in the background. The JTAC on the ground, who's the controller, is saying, "We're taking fire, immediate fire. We need bombs now." And so I roll in, I release a weapon. A few moments later, it impacts, and I hear good hits from the controller. But it's not enough. There's taking fire from multiple different positions. So my wingman rolls in, I roll in. We continue doing this for the next 15 minutes until we're completely out of weapons. And this is a problem because we're the only aircraft on station. And so I call back via my satellite phone all the way to the headquarters. They're in a different country. They're 1,000 miles away. And I say, "We need to divert aircraft here." And the response that I get back is negative. We don't have any assets available. So I call back to the base I just took off from and said, "We need to launch additional jets." And the response that I get back is negative. We don't have any jets available. We don't have any pilots available. And that's because everybody was focused on their task of getting home. But then a decision was made. The maintainers really are the backbone of the Air Force. They're the ones that keep the aircraft, the mechanics that keep the aircraft in the sky. They made a decision. They made a decision to swarm the problem. They said, if we dedicate everybody to getting one of these jets ready for combat, because typically it takes a full day, we can do it in under an hour. And so they said, "Why don't you come back, take this jet back into combat?" And so I kept my wingman on station. I flew back as fast as I can, landed, taxi, parked, ran to the other jet. And, it was the most incredible sight. It was just swarmed with these maintainers. And there's really this ownership flywheel operating at full speed. They were taking ownership of these U.S. Army Rangers. A few minutes later, everybody cleared off. I got in the cockpit, strapped in, took off, and by this point, an airborne tanker who was halfway to a different country had turned around to provide fuel for us so that we could stay on station. It's that one team, one fight. And we continued supporting those Rangers as they slowly made their way back to their base. Day turned into dusk. You could just see this red sun through the dirt. And then turned into night. Now we're doing this all through our night vision goggles. Everything's that shades of black and green. until finally those Rangers were able to make it back to their base. And fortunately that day we didn't suffer any casualties. And that victory was won by a group of maintainers on the ground who chose to to take ownership of that task. And it was really amazing to see this group of people take ownership for the lives of people that they had never met before, and to risk their own well-being to do it, because they were having to change up what they were doing. Instead of just focusing on those individual tasks, they were able to support us for that mission, even though it went against some of the regulations that they had. But they were able to save lives that day, and it's just really special to see that and to be a part of that team.
Well, Hasard, we asked people in the chat whether they had any questions. I guess you have covered this in such great detail that nobody has any questions, which I'm surprised in a group this size. But this has been really terrific. Looking back, I wish I would have had this framework when I started in 1996. I think it would have helped me be a better leader. It would have helped protect my patients, and it would have helped me mentor others with more clarity. The debrief alone would have prevented so many duplicate mistakes. In EMS, we get task focused, just like you do in the air, how to open the airway, start compressions, pushing beds. But I think what's really missing is how to make those high risk, low information, time sensitive decisions. And that's why I reached out to you, and we've fixed this so that it works for EMS. This framework has the power to change how we think, act, and respond when seconds count. Time is truly the enemy, both in the air and in the airway. When lives are on the line, clarity is everything, and everything flows from clarity. Now, there's no way that we can teach all of this in 1 hour. This is just a start. But if you truly believe in helping your patients and your partners, this is the next tool that you need, because experts don't stop at the basics. They really keep training. That's why I hope that if you're an EMT, you'll go on to paramedic. If you go on to paramedic, maybe you'll become an FTO or a commander. And again, unfortunately, the EMS curriculum doesn't include this ACE framework yet. We're hoping that maybe someday it will. But even if it does, there's not enough time to go as deep as we'd like. I want to thank you for being here today. I know this is going to save lives and make your job easier and help us build an EMS community and something that's truly special. So I want to wish you good luck on your calls and stay safe. And Hasard, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, it's really been an honor to put this framework and really to optimize it for EMS personnel. I've had a chance to work with a lot of different professions like surgeons and businesses as well. But I can't think of another career field that is as similar to being a fighter pilot as EMS. You're on these sites, you have limited information, you're showing up, it's chaos, and you have to make good decisions. And you're in the heat of the moment, just like being in a fighter pilot. And then afterwards, everybody's going to second guess what you did. And so it comes down to being able to perform at your best, and lives are on the line for both fields. And so that's why it's really been an honor to be able to optimize this for EMS personnel, because I know it's going to be able to save lives. It's definitely saved lives as fighter pilots. It's made us better. And I think that's what it's about. It's about creating an impact. You're planting seeds for trees that you may never sit under. You're an advocate for your career field. So I really want to just say thanks for having me here.
Some questions popped up in the chat, so we have just a couple minutes. Jeffrey asks, how did you get your call sign? I may answer this one for you. Normally, you have to buy him a scotch to get the full story. I didn't even get it when we had sushi in Phoenix recently, so I don't know that he wants to go into that. The second one is, could you go over Law 1 again? Law 1 was one team, one fight, and that's really mission over ego. And then Hasard, I'm going to kick this one over to you. How do you cope with mistakes or bad calls, whether it be yours or others?
So I break it down through that ACE framework. So the ACE framework works in reflection as well. So mistakes happen in one of three buckets. So the first is, was there a proper assessment made? Were they able to build the picture? Was the information available to them? If it was, then you move on to the second one. were they able to choose the right option? Based on their assessment, did they make the right choice? Maybe they didn't. If they didn't, then that's the area that you really dig down and focus on. And lastly, execute. So maybe they made a great assessment of the situation, of the problem, then they made a great choice, and then they fumbled the execution. And if they did that, that's where you have to dig in. Did they fumble it because they have bad technique? Did they fumble it because they were choking? So it really works well in being able to isolate the bucket of where the problem happened.
Thanks for listening. And remember, the world needs more people who can stay calm, think clearly, and save lives. If you'd like to become an EMT, a paramedic, or even earn your bachelor's degree in EMS from Texas State University, visit EMTSacademy.com or scan the QR code on your screen. At EMTS Academy, we train the next generation of EMS professionals from the classroom to the field. Until next time, stay safe.